Today we're going to talk about data. Just a few words. I'm Alex Guérin. I head Ipsos in France. My colleague Pat, who you see the picture here, will also be speaking in a few minutes. Pat heads our marketing mix modeling business. He's an analytics expert, and we're going to show you a few use cases, which I think will bring to life the topics we want to cover today. It's a pretty amazing time to be in market research or to be in consumer understanding or in insights overall. We're just coming out of a pandemic, which has completely shifted, tilted behaviors, usages, attitudes. Certain trends have been accelerated. Digitalization is definitely one of them. And the result of that is, of course, that the amount of data has continued to explode. With some slides here, there we go. So every time we do a chart like this, we discover new words, right? So we're now at 79 zettabytes, last time we counted. Just to make sense of that, if you divide that by the actual number of individuals, that's probably over 20,000 videos, 2 million pictures, or more than 75 billion messages for every person on the planet. It's interesting for the purpose of this discussion to take a look at what type of data we're talking about. And just to make sense of it, this is how we look at it from the Ipsos point of view. All these data have different usages, they're collected in different ways, and they face separate challenges. On the left-hand side, you have all the data that we request, and we typically would use a market research company to request some of those data. So you'll have free expression, free text, verbatims, more and more speech-to-text, speech data, video data, pictures, all of that we can start to analyze. Of course, what we call in our jargon the open ends, which is the free expression part of a survey. When you fill in an NPS survey, for instance, you're always asked a question to comment on the service you were provided. And this can be completely unstructured, or it can be structured, quant, etc., etc. But then, as we know, you also have all this unrequested data. Some of that is called first-party data. I'm sure you've heard that term before. It could be user-generated, social posts, visual data, again, video. All the ratings and review is also something which is exploding, I would say. And then all the structured data, which can come from any customer interaction between a brand and a customer. It could be passive data, IoT, of course, all the metering out there. Of course, you have your CRM and client data, and sales is part of that. In some countries, you can also buy financial records, for instance, and then all the open data. We'll give you a few examples of that as well. So it's a lot to get your head around. And the question is, how do you combine that for maximum impact? And if we go to the next slide here. Okay, there we go. We have actually conducted our survey with our largest clients. And Ipsos World works with the most global brands in the world across all sectors, tech included. And this is what we found. Right? We've interviewed over 50 of our clients, different levels in the organization, different roles within the organization, either on the insight side, on the marketing side, on the actual data side of things. All sectors. What were these brands telling us? Combining all these different data sets to actually make sense of it and bring business value, we're still very far from that. It remains very challenging. And in fact, all the data types that we spoke about are in fact represented and managed by different silos within these companies. And that's not helping anyone, right? And our job probably as Ipsos, as people who understand data, have been working with data for over 45 years now, who understand the underlying biases between all of these data, who've been working on these techniques for such a long time, is to break down these silos and to leverage use cases for impact. And we're going to show you a few examples of how we do that. And the overarching model, if we go to the next slide. We have a bit of a lag. Sorry, guys. There we go. And the motto is really to try to answer the 5 W's. We know the who, we know the what, we know the when, we know the where. In first-party data, you have a lot of that, right? But the real question is actually what's happening, is to try to make that data speak, right? And this is where getting the insights, understanding, trying to understand why we're seeing these correlations, why we are seeing these patterns. This is what will actually allow you to ask the right questions, to select the right data you need for these models, and then to come up with something that makes sense. Combining all the data isn't really a strategy until you ask yourself these questions, translate that into business questions, and then actually you start the work. We're going to show you some examples of that across 4 use cases, and then I'll hand over to Pat, who will speak more specifically about how we do this in real time in marketing and forecasting use cases. But first, let's talk a little bit about mobility, which is on the next slide. Again, mobility is, okay, still waiting for the lag. Are we able to show the next one? Okay, right, okay. So mobility, that's another trend which has been completely shuffled and disrupted. This is a work we do for a client, and the goal is to understand and leverage new mobility habits, right? The idea is to get a geo-localized reference with very granular information, which you can use for audience profiling, for instance, which you can use for city planning, for instance. Very, very valuable data. And of course, you need to go at a very granular level. And here we combine, just to name the different data sets that we're able to combine. First of all, GPS data. We actually equip people with very fine and precise GPS meters, much more precise than what you get on your typical iPhone. We're able to track those, representative sample of mobility. We ask the same people to also fill in their own diary, to tell us what they were doing at the time when they were doing that. That's also interesting, for instance, to understand exposure to media. There's a lot of geo data that you can add to that. Public transportation network data, for instance, is part of that model as well. National open data, local traffic volumes, and then even telco data in the countries where we're allowed to do that by tracking masses of cell phones over time, and in some cases, satellite data as well. And another example on the next slide of how we used satellite data is in the case of, and if we can move to the next slide, is how we used it in Beirut. You all remember that horrendous explosion that we had in Beirut. This is a project we did very quickly with the World Bank. And the question is, how do you bring relief where? Both short-term relief and then also actually helping in the reconstruction of Beirut. We were literally using real-time satellite imagery. Drones were flying over Beirut. We got access to that data as well. We looked at, of course, social media posts. Where we couldn't get data, we sent Ipsos surveyors on the ground. Tell us what was happening, which buildings were demolished, which were still standing. NGO assessments, of course, they were on the ground, on the field. They had a lot of access to that information as well. And we were able, very quickly, to produce maps like these to understand where short-term relief had to be prioritized. And these maps can also be used for city planning to actually plan the reconstruction of Beirut. Isn't it great when you can also talk about not just the marketing stuff and clients, but bring examples to life like these ones? I'll give you 2 more examples, and if you can go to the next chart. Okay, wonderful. Consumer centricity. This is actually a project we do with one of our main clients, Pernod Ricard. Here we leverage survey data, but we also mine everything that's on social media to understand what we call in French moments de convivialité, which are basically occasions to have fun. And their whole customer segmentation, go-to-market strategies now orchestrated around such moments, right? And this entails really listening to the consumers, looking at everything that's on social media, not just text, but also videos and pictures to actually educate their whole marketing strategy. This is what we call an award-winning program in this case. And I think, we still have some other examples, but I think I'll just pass over to Pat now, because we're on schedule, but just about. And we're going to talk about data models and how you basically integrate this for activation and measurement. So Pat, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. The landscape for marketing measurement has changed dramatically over the last few years. When I began doing this work, and 5-10 years ago, you'd be doing this with a few megs, maybe a few gigs of data if you were fortunate. Today, for some of our clients, we're processing over 100 terabytes of data a month and moving from monthly and quarterly and semi-annual updates to daily and day part updates. So, and it's interesting because it used to be marketing measurement, and now when you look at the types of questions we're answering, it's more along the lines of commercial measurement, because it really is measuring the impact of everything on everything. And the goal really is to help understand, how are you optimizing marketing with everything, with your operational investments, your sales investments? How are you able to get the right messaging to your brand, to the community, and then working that all the way on down to, when you look at the strategic questions, right? How do you get very tactical day to day in real time when you're talking about things like digital and attribution, where you're trying to reach those customers in an omni-channel environment to optimize your short and long-term sales with them. To do that, and again, this is where there's been so much shift. Many companies used to look predominantly at the marketing and media data, but everything really does have the ability to impact to some extent on everything. So you've got to look at the environment holistically from a marketing and media standpoint. You have to bring in the operational factors, environmental factors, and then you have to get that working in the customer's environment, all the way through the consumer engagement, addressing their specific objectives, and then reaching out across all the business dimensions that are relevant so that you can get the right answers in real time to the client. One of the big changes in doing this type of work has been the absolute necessity for data partnerships. Without data partnerships, you lack the richness in real time that is required to do that. And so you've got to collect a range of individual data all the way down to aggregate. So when you look at that, you're looking at publisher first-party data with companies like HealthVerity, Adform, VideoAmp, shared ID products, partnering with companies like LiveRamp and Epsilon, audience cohort data from Google, Amazon, and then you have to weave all of that together, to create predictive commercial and marketing models. And you have to do it holistically. You have to unify all this data so that you can get the right answers. Otherwise, you run the risk of significantly misattributing the value of one piece of marketing for another. So when you look at doing things like commercial mix or marketing mix and customer attribution, bringing those things together so that they talk to each other and they're properly crediting each other allows you to optimize the KPIs, optimize and understand the short and long-term balance of what you're trying to accomplish, and most importantly, in real time, target specific valuable customer segments and audiences so you can create the value you're looking to do. Ipsos is very unique in this area, right? Many companies who do analytics are very analytic and short-term focused. A lot of research companies are focused on sort of things that lag a little bit. By bringing all this together with analytics and market research, Ipsos is able to weave in the brand health and the brand equity components into these type of analytics so that as you do them, you not only address the short-term business planning components, but you're able to understand across the funnel what the value long-term of your marketing is. The piece that is really critical in this, though, is as you collect all this data, as you build out the predictive models, is that you activate it. And the focus on activation ranges from the long-term annual component all the way on down to the daily. So as you're looking at budget setting by geography or business unit or channel or optimization of your media, right? Those are things you typically do quarterly, typically do semi-annually or annually, but the range of data now allows us to explore the customer journey, do campaign and targeting on a daily basis. And do that in a way that is a closed loop process, because one of the opportunities that this richness of data has presented is the ability to not only recommend while you're planning, but track, measure, and then use that information to reinform analytics so that you can make better decisions up and down the hierarchy. It allows you to develop scenarios, war games, simulate plans, track performances. As all this richness of data feeds back in, we're able to build out specific benchmarks across geographies, across industries, across categories to say, maybe if people haven't done things before, we can reach into this very rich data benchmark database that accesses terabytes of insights from many years going back. And certainly in a crisis situation like we've been in for the last year or so, that helps us get to some very rich insights that people wouldn't otherwise get to. It helps us understand business performance and provides better visibility into understanding key drivers, that aren't just marketing, but are they environmental? Are they operational? It allows us to get down into rich campaign insights. So what elements of a campaign are actually working and are most effective? One of the things that, obviously the COVID is a terrible crisis, but it woke up a lot of people in the industry to realizing that you have to be able to change dynamically. And there are signals that come into the market on a regular basis that allow you to constantly sort of measure and understand what is actually happening with the customers, what environmental things, what conditions are changing that might impact on your plans 3-6 months out. So building out signals that allow you to make adjustments before things happen is very important. So more and more, and there's a lot of this that goes on within Ipsos MMA. We're having to recalibrate before things happen so you can optimize people's investments. When you have clients who are spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in commercial investments, you don't want to wait until it's happened and it's too late. You want to be able to predict, reinform, and replan if you need to. More and more, we're finding the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And the why is so important. And it's one of the things that Ipsos is able to bring the 5 W's together to be able to, in real time, inform where you need to go to optimize your investments. So I thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Alex.